Judge John Roberts tries to intimidate Karoline Leavitt, then discovers she is a legal genius. Judge John Roberts had walked into dozens of congressional hearings over the years. He wore the same expression every time, a calm that looked practiced, maybe even earned. To some, it was composure. To others, it was insulation. But today, the insulation wouldn't be enough. Room 2340 in the Longworth House office building was too quiet for comfort. It wasn't the hush of respect, it was the stillness that comes before something sharp slices through certainty. Reporters hunched forward in their seats. Cameras clicked once, then stopped, as if even they were waiting to exhale. Roberts sat at the witness table in a tailored charcoal suit with a lapel pin no one dared ask about. He had prepared, as always, reading briefings, anticipating questions, mapping out his answers like chess moves. He didn't rattle easily. After all, this was the Chief Justice of the United States. What could possibly surprise him? Then the clerk called her name. Congresswoman Karoline Leavitt, New Hampshire. There was a pause, like a skipped heartbeat. She leaned in slightly, adjusting the microphone not out of nerves, but precision. The kind of movement that told the room she knew exactly how loud she needed to be. No more, no less. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She had that rare tone, the one that cuts not by volume, but by direction. Straight. Unapologetic. And rooted. Some aides shuffled. Some committee members checked their notes. A few barely looked up. Leavitt was young. New. Just 26. The youngest Republican woman ever elected to Congress. To some in that room, she was an ambitious headline with a mic. But to others, especially those who'd watched her dismantle political theater with policy fire, she was something else. An anomaly with edge. Across from her sat Chief Justice Roberts. He offered the same smile he reserved for freshman lawmakers and overconfident litigants. A smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. It was meant to disarm. To place her back in the role of student. But Karoline didn't blink. Chief Justice, she began, in 2011, you told the graduating class at Harvard Law that credibility is your currency. That when public trust evaporates, everything else collapses. Do you still believe that? A faint murmur. Not loud enough to register, but real. She didn't wait for him to dig for the quote. She had it printed, underlined, annotated. Roberts clasped his hands together. Yes, Congresswoman. I do. Good, she said, flipping to her second page without looking down. Because today I have questions. Not about your opinions. But about your practices. A staffer exhaled, quick and sharp. Roberts narrowed his gaze. Not in anger. In calculation. And for the first time in the room that morning, the Chief Justice understood. She hadn't come to admire the robe. She'd come to test what was underneath it. Roberts answered with a pause disguised as composure. Congresswoman, the court holds itself to the highest standards of integrity. We operate under time-honored principles, even without a formal code. Karoline tilted her head, just slightly. Not with amusement. With focus. I'm aware of those principles, she said. I've read them. I've also read the financial disclosure reports of several sitting justices. Including the one who received an all-expenses-paid trip to a private fishing lodge in Alaska, arranged by a corporate executive whose company had an active case before your court. No recusal. No explanation. No footnote. The quiet in the room thickened. One senator glanced up from his notes. A journalist stopped mid-keystroke. Roberts cleared his throat. Congresswoman, the justices are responsible for their own disclosures, and those are reviewed internally through appropriate administrative channels. Karoline didn't react. She simply turned the page in her folder. So, to clarify, you're confirming that the Supreme Court of the United States relies on the honor system? I wouldn't call it that. But it is that. She didn't blink. And she didn't raise her voice. That's not a partisan accusation, Chief Justice. It's an observation of infrastructure. And for a nation that calls itself a republic of laws, that's a structural failure. Because if 9 people interpret the law for 330 million, and no one outside that circle gets to ask why they make the decisions they do, then we're not talking about justice. We're talking about something else. He opened his mouth. She kept going. In 2021, Justice Wexler wrote the majority opinion in Stonewall v. Carter Industries. The plaintiff's legal team included a former business partner of Justice Wexler's son. There was no recusal. There was no mention of the relationship in the docket. And when asked why, the official response was that there was no direct conflict. Roberts shifted in his seat, not dramatically. Just enough to show that he recognized the case. Enough to show it wasn't a surprise. Just a sore spot. Karoline leaned in, eyes locked. But Chief Justice, if a small-town judge failed to disclose a family tie in a DUI case, they'd be disbarred by Friday. Why does your court get to hide behind tradition when the rest of us answer to the people? There it was. The heat without volume. The accusation without a single insult. Roberts took a breath. The judiciary must remain independent. That's the cornerstone of our democracy. I agree, she replied immediately. But independence without accountability isn't democracy. It's immunity. And right now, the people I represent don't see a blindfolded Lady Justice. They see a closed door. And the doorknob's on your side. She didn't move. Neither did he. But something between them had. The insulation had thinned. And it was only the second question. Roberts straightened, his fingers now laced more tightly, the crease of his forehead just barely visible. Congresswoman, he began, each justice takes these matters seriously. You may not see the mechanisms, but they do exist. Karoline nodded. I'm not questioning whether they exist, Chief Justice. I'm asking whether they work. He opened his mouth again, but she cut in, not rudely, just sharply. You once said, before a Senate panel in 2005, that the appearance of impropriety can be just as corrosive to the judiciary as impropriety itself. Those were your words. Do you still stand by them? Roberts paused. Yes. Then help me understand, she continued, tapping the edge of her folder, why Justice Harlan accepted luxury accommodations from a lobbyist-turned-legal consultant, whose firm later filed an amicus brief in Marlin v. D.C., and still ruled on the case without disclosure. Another stillness fell. Roberts looked toward the committee chair, then back at her. I'm not at liberty to discuss individual cases or justices. Karoline raised a hand, not to interrupt, but to refocus. I'm not asking you to comment on the ruling, Chief Justice. I'm asking you to explain the standard. The one you lectured about nearly 2 decades ago. If even the appearance of impropriety erodes trust, what do you call this? The silence lingered. Even the committee chair leaned back in his seat. Karoline glanced down, then looked up again, softer now. There's a mother in Manchester, New Hampshire, Deborah Milner. She spent 6 years navigating the appeals process after her son's workplace injury was denied compensation. 6 years. And her case never made it past the circuit. But billionaires with private jet access to justices seem to leap the line. You say the court is independent. I say it's insulated. Roberts adjusted his tie. These comparisons are not equitable, Congresswoman. The court does not control which cases it is petitioned to hear. But it does control which ones it chooses to hear, Karoline said, her voice lower now, heavier. And right now, it's choosing wrong. Not just legally, but morally. The line didn't shout. But it landed. Because sometimes, the most dangerous questions are the ones delivered without flinching. And she hadn't flinched once. Roberts didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. The kind that buys time without looking like retreat. Karoline watched him closely, then leaned forward, her voice soft but unmistakably pointed. Chief Justice, the American people aren't looking for perfect judges. They're looking for honest ones. But when the body tasked with interpreting fairness refuses to practice transparency, what message does that send? She didn't wait for a reply. She pulled a thin document from her folder and slid it forward on the desk. This is a copy of the 2022 financial disclosure from Justice Harland. No mention of hospitality. No note on travel reimbursements. But 6 months after his ruling in Marlin v. D.C., the host's law firm reported a record-breaking federal contract award, approved just weeks after the decision. A low murmur broke in the gallery. It wasn't scripted. It was instinct. Roberts kept his hands still. "I cannot speak to correlation, Congresswoman." Karoline's lips didn't move into a smile, but her tone carried a razor's edge of clarity. "I didn't say correlation. I said omission. Intentional or not, it's there." She sat back in her chair but didn't relax. Her shoulders stayed square, her posture unflinching. In a small-town courtroom, a public defender would raise hell if a judge failed to disclose a vacation with the prosecution. It wouldn't take a Senate hearing. It wouldn't require public outrage. It would be unacceptable on sight. But somehow, when it's 9 justices and billionaires, we're told it's complicated. She tapped her pen on the desk once. Deliberate. Audible. If you're your own watchdog, Chief Justice, then who's watching you? That's when the room shifted again. Not because of noise. Because of silence. And Roberts knew it. He wasn't being challenged by a protester or a pundit. He was being held accountable by someone who did her homework and wasn't asking permission to be taken seriously. And Karoline wasn't done yet. Chief Justice Roberts took a slow breath, the kind that usually helped him refrain control. But today, it wasn't working the same. His voice was steady, but thinner now. "The court does not answer to political pressure, Congresswoman. We answer to the Constitution and the law." Karoline didn't flinch. "Then let's talk about the law." She pulled another document from her folder and held it up. A legal opinion, neatly tabbed, with handwritten notes in the margins. She didn't wave it for drama. She simply placed it before her and continued. "Are you familiar with Dalton v. Mason County, 5th Circuit, 2009? Roberts blinked. "I believe so." That was a case involving judicial recusal procedures. Karoline nodded. "Correct. A judge had indirect financial ties to a litigant. He claimed they were distant enough not to matter. But the ruling stated, explicitly, that even the appearance of bias was enough to undermine the legitimacy of the court." She slid the document closer toward him. "So help me understand how, just last year, Justice Wexler ruled on Mon v. Delta Rail, a case where his longtime friend and financial donor stood to benefit directly, and there wasn't even a disclosure." Roberts shifted slightly. "Congresswoman, as I stated, each justice is individually responsible for maintaining their own compliance with disclosure standards. That's not a standard. That's a loophole with a business card." She leaned in, voice level. "If your colleagues don't recuse, if they don't disclose, if they don't acknowledge conflicts, and no one corrects them, then your institution isn't guarding democracy. It's impersonating it." The tension didn't erupt. It deepened. Because what she said wasn't abstract. It was surgical. She lowered her voice now, more like a teacher than an accuser. "I spent 4 years in broadcast journalism before I stepped into public service. I interviewed veterans who'd lost their homes, mothers who'd lost their children, small business owners crushed under bureaucracy. Every one of them believed that, somewhere, someone in power would care. Not fix everything, but care." She turned a page, her tone shifting again. Sharper. "And yet, when their cases made it to the federal courts, if they ever made it that far, they didn't get explanations. They didn't get clarity. They got silence." Her voice slowed. "But when a corporate donor with a private line to a justice files a case, they get a hearing within 4 months and a 5-4 decision in their favor. She sat back, folded her hands, and stared straight across the table. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's your court's docket. Roberts opened his mouth, but no words came out. Karoline gave him space. And then filled it. You called this passion, she said. It's not. It's precision. I'm not here to yell. I'm not here to guess. I'm asking you how you expect people like Deborah Milner in Manchester, who worked 2 jobs, raised 3 kids, played by every rule, to believe that justice is still a neutral idea. When all she sees is doors that only open if your check clears. Still silence. She dropped her voice further. You don't have a code. You don't have an external review board. You don't even have a formal mechanism to discipline your own colleagues. The entire system relies on the public believing that you will do the right thing. Roberts inhaled deeply. Karoline watched him. But how long, she asked, before that belief runs out? A flicker passed across his face. Not defeat. Something quieter. Recognition. Because in that moment, he wasn't hearing a lecture. He was being handed a mirror. And he didn't like what he saw in it. Roberts finally leaned forward, resting his fingertips on the table as if grounding himself in something solid. Congresswoman Leavitt, he said carefully, your concerns are noted. But I would caution against drawing broad conclusions from isolated events. Karoline didn't break eye contact. I'm not drawing conclusions, Chief Justice. I'm drawing connections. She let the words settle. You once told law students their credibility was their currency. That if the public lost trust in their integrity, everything else collapsed. Do you believe that still applies to the highest court in the land? His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He gave a slow nod. Of course. Karoline leaned forward now, voice low and resolute. Then I suggest you look closely, sir. Because the public ledger on this court's credibility? It's in overdraft. There it was. Not shouted. Not performed. Just spoken. Like truth. And it landed like a gavel. The room didn't move. Not the aides. Not the press. Not even the committee chair. Everyone seemed to recognize what had just happened, but no one wanted to break it by speaking too soon. Roberts's gaze lowered for a moment. His hands, still clasped, shifted slightly. Not fidgeting. Just aware. Karoline didn't gloat. She didn't even lean back. She just waited. Then, calmly, she flipped to her final page. There's a man in Derry, New Hampshire, she said quietly. Vietnam veteran. Lost his pension appeal 3 years ago because a clerk typed the wrong filing date. No hearing. No review. Just a cold, silent denial. Her eyes didn't leave Roberts. That man told me he still believed in the system. Even after it ignored him. Because he thought, somewhere, someone in power still cared. A long pause. I told him I'd ask. She didn't need to say more. Because this wasn't about a headline. And it wasn't about humiliation. It was about asking, clearly, firmly, and in front of the nation, whether the people who interpret fairness still recognize what it feels like. The chairman's voice finally cut through the stillness. The committee thanks Congresswoman Leavitt for her line of questioning. Even he spoke slower now. As if speeding past what just happened might disrespect it. Roberts adjusted his tie again, but the motion was smaller this time, less polished, more human. He nodded politely toward the chair, then back to Karoline. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. Your district, he said, is fortunate to have you. Karoline nodded once. I know. She didn't smile. She didn't perform. She just closed her folder, folded her hands over it, and sat still. The hearing continued, but the tone had changed. Questions from other representatives felt more deliberate. Less performative. The air had shifted. And it wasn't just because of what had been said, it was because of how she said it. With facts. Without flinching. Outside the hearing room, the clip spread fast. News outlets aired it within the hour. But more importantly, people watched it. People who didn't know what judicial ethics meant. People who didn't care about precedent or precedent about precedent. But they understood one thing: she spoke plainly. She didn't ask for power, she challenged it. In a diner in Concord, a waitress pulled out her phone and replayed one of Karoline's lines for a customer at the counter. In a high school government class, a teenage girl asked her teacher, "Can you be that honest and still get elected?" And somewhere, in a quiet house in Derry, a veteran sat in his recliner and whispered, "She asked." Inside the hearing room, as the last round of questioning wound down, Roberts gathered his papers. He stood, gave a nod to the chair, and turned to leave. But before he stepped away from the table, he glanced back. Karoline hadn't moved. "Congresswoman," he said softly, "you made your point." She met his eyes. "No," she replied. "I made their point." He looked at her for a second longer than protocol usually allows. Then he walked out, not defeated, but altered. Later that night, when the clip aired on national TV, the hosts tried to categorize it: confrontation, debate, ambush. But the people watching didn't need a category. They saw what mattered. That sometimes justice doesn't wear robes. Sometimes it wears clarity. And sits across the table from silence, until silence listens.